In America, every old college dorm has a secret. It's usually buried under 3 flights of stairs, past the humming fuse boxes and the leaking pipes. It's the basement laundry room, a place where time doesn't exist. It's 2 a.m., the air is thick with the smell of cheap detergent and stagnant water. And the only sound is the rhythmic, violent thumping of a washing machine that's older than you are. They tell you not to go down there alone after midnight. Not because of the flickering lights or the urban legends about a janitor from the 70s who simply stopped existing one day. They tell you because of the mirrors. Have you ever noticed how many mirrors are in those old basements? Cracked, silver-stained glass over rusted sinks. My name is Alex, and I'm a sophomore at a university in Pennsylvania. I lived in Miller Hall, a brick monolith built in 1924. My mistake wasn't doing my laundry late. My mistake was looking at my reflection for 1 second too long. The clock on my nightstand read 1:47 a.m. I had exactly 1 clean shirt left for my 8 a.m. exam, and it was covered in a dark coffee stain. The dorm was dead quiet, that heavy, artificial silence you only find in buildings filled with hundreds of sleeping people. It's a silence that feels like it's waiting for something to happen. I grabbed my plastic hamper. It felt heavier than usual. The weight of the damp clothes shifting inside like something shifting its posture. I stepped out into the hallway, the carpet worn thin by decades of students, and headed for the service elevator. But the out of order sign was taped over Sputtons again, a yellowed piece of paper that looked like it had been there for a century. I took the stairs. The light in the stairwell was that sickly, hospital yellow color that makes everyone look like a fading photograph. As I descended, the temperature dropped. The air turned from the dry heat of the dorm rooms to a damp, subterranean chill. By the time I reached the basement level, I could see my breath in small, ghostly plumes. The door to the laundry room was heavy steel, painted a gray that looked like weathered stone. Creak. The sound echoed down the concrete corridor like a closing cell door. I stepped inside. The laundry room was a forest of white machines. 30 of them lined up in rows like headstones in a forgotten cemetery. Most were dark, their digital displays blank. But only one was running, unit number 04. It was vibrating so hard it was slowly inching away from the wall, its metal feet screeching against the concrete. Thump, thump, thump. Inside the circular glass door, something heavy was spinning. It didn't look like clothes. It looked like a dense, dark mass hitting the metal drum over and over again, leaving dark, oily streaks on the glass. I walked to the back, toward the industrial dryers. The lighting here was erratic. One fluorescent tube was dying, casting a rhythmic strobe effect over the room. Buzz, pop, buzz. It felt like a heartbeat, a mechanical, dying heartbeat. I started loading my clothes into machine number 12. That's when I felt it. That prickle on the back of your neck when you know someone is standing right behind you. It's a primitive instinct, a warning from your nervous system. I froze, a handful of socks halfway to the machine. The humming of the basement seemed to grow louder, filling my ears until it felt like my brain was vibrating inside my skull. I turned around. Nothing. Just rows of empty machines and a pile of forgotten gray towels in the corner. like the room was full of observers I just couldn't see. I needed to splash some water on my face. I was tired, hallucinating shadows, letting the Miller Hall ghost stories get to me. I walked over to the old porcelain sink against the far wall. It was a deep industrial basin, stained with rust and years of chemical cleaners. Above it hung a large rectangular mirror. The mirror was covered in a film of grime and water spots, but it was clear enough to see my own exhausted face. I looked terrible. My skin was pale under the fluorescent lights, and my eyes were sunken. I turned the tap. The pipes groaned deep within the walls, a sound like a giant beast shifting in its sleep. The water came out a deep, muddy brown at first, thick with sediment that looked like oxidized iron. I let it run until it turned clear and ice cold. I cupped the water in my hands and pressed it to my face. The cold was shocking, stinging my skin. I kept my eyes closed for a few seconds, savoring the sharpness of the temperature. When I looked up into the mirror, I saw myself. But the room behind me in the reflection, it looked different. In the real room, the lights were flickering. In the reflection, the lights were steady and bright. In the real room, the air was misty from the dryer steam. In the reflection, the air was perfectly, unnervingly clear. And then I noticed the background. Behind me, at the very end of the row of washing machines, a door I hadn't noticed before was slightly ajar. A dark wooden door that didn't exist in the real laundry room. And from the darkness of that reflected room, something was watching me. It wasn't a face. It was just 2 points of pale silver light, reflecting the glare of the ceiling lamp. Like a predator caught in headlights, but they were too high up. Whatever was standing in that reflected doorway was tall. Too tall for a human. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I watched the reflection of the dark door in the glass. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. They just waited. I tried to tell myself it was a smudge on the glass, a trick of the light. I slowly started to turn my head to look behind me, to see if the door was actually there in the physical world. But as I turned my physical head to the right, my reflection in the mirror stayed still. My reflection was still looking straight ahead, staring directly at the spot where my face had just been. Its head didn't move. Its hands stayed gripped on the edge of the porcelain sink. I was looking at the back of my reflection's head, but my reflection was looking at my eyes. The laws of reality had simply stopped working. I felt a coldness wash over me that had nothing to do with the basement air. It was a spiritual cold, a sudden realization that the me in the mirror was no longer a shadow. It was an entity. Slowly, the reflection's mouth began to curve. It wasn't a smile. It was a predatory peel of the lips, revealing rows of small, needle-like teeth. "Alex," the reflection said. Its lips didn't move in the mirror, but I heard the voice. It wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from inside my own mind. "You're going to be late for the exchange." I felt my heart slam against my ribs, but my reflection remained terrifyingly calm. Its chest didn't rise. Its fingers, long and unnaturally pale, began to grip the porcelain sink in the mirror. I heard a sound, not from the room, but from the glass. Creak. The sound of something very hard being crushed by an impossible force. I slowly pulled my right hand away from the real sink. My reflection's hand stayed exactly where it was. Its grip tightened until the mirrored porcelain began to spiderweb with cracks. "This isn't real," I whispered. My voice sounded flat, muffled, but my reflection didn't blink. Instead, it began to lean forward. Inch by inch, its face grew larger in the glass, filling my entire vision. I saw the dark, sprawling veins beneath its skin. Its pupils were massive, black holes that seemed to swallow the light. Suddenly, it raised its mirrored hand and pressed it against the surface of the glass from the inside. A dull, heavy thud echoed through the basement. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't knocking on glass. It felt like it was knocking on the inside of my forehead. The surface of the mirror began to frost over, a deep, unnatural ice spreading from its fingertips. A wave of grave chill rolled off the mirror, turning the humid laundry room into a freezer. A violent metallic scream erupted from machine number 4. It was the sound of iron grinding against iron. Screeker thud. I stumbled back, breaking the gaze of my reflection, and spun toward the machines. The drum of unit number 04 was spinning at a dangerous speed. A thick, dark maroon liquid began to spray through the rubber seals, misting into the air. It smelled like oxidized metal and old, damp earth. The fluid began to pool on the floor, bubbling like a chemical reaction. Every drop that hit the concrete sounded heavy, echoing like a heartbeat. Lub-dub. Lub-dub. The digital display on the machine was stuck at 0000, but the motor was screaming louder, rising into an ultrasonic pitch. The vibration was so intense that the other machines began to act on their own. The doors of Units 6, 8, and 10 suddenly swung open in perfect synchronization, like rows of gaping dark pits. I lunged for the door, but the floor had become a trap. The dark fluid from the sink and the machines had flooded the room, and in every shimmering puddle, I saw a version of myself. Thousands of tiny me's were staring up from the concrete. One was covering his face in terror. Another was laughing without sound. A third was simply pointing a finger at my feet. I tripped and caught myself on the old cast iron radiator. It was blistering hot, nearly glowing red. I grabbed it to steady myself, and I felt the air around my hands hiss. But there was no pain. Instead, I felt a sickening sensation of vacuum. Something was draining the warmth out of my body. That's when I heard it. The whisper didn't come from the air. It came from inside the radiator pipes. It's so cold in the dark, Alex. We need your heat. Just a little. Just enough to move. I looked at the radiator. Between the iron fins, something began to crawl out. It looked like black, oily tendrils. It was sentient. It reached for my hands, greedily absorbing the temperature of my skin. This was the radiant heat the old basement legends whispered about. These entities have no warmth of their own. They are parasites of energy, cosmic scavengers that can only exist if they steal the heat from the living. I finally reached the steel door. I grabbed the handle and pulled with everything I had. It didn't budge. It was as if the metal had fused with the frame. No, no, please! I hammered on the steel. Open the door! But the concrete walls were too thick. My cries were lost in the hum of the machines. I turned around, my back to the exit. The lights in the laundry room began to die. One by one, the rows of machines were plunged into darkness. The only source of light left was the mirror over the sink. It was glowing with a pale, phosphorescent light. A hand began to emerge from the mirror. A physical hand made of gray, bloodless skin. It gripped the frame of the mirror and pulled. The sound of the glass breaking was like someone tearing a heavy leather sheet. My reflection was stepping through the threshold. First the shoulder, then the head. It crawled out of the glass like a person squeezing through a crack in a wall. Its movements were jagged, shivering, like a broken puppet. Every joint emitted a sound like dry wood snapping. Crack, pop, snap. It stood on the concrete floor, and everywhere its feet touched, the ground turned to black frost. It stretched its long, thin limbs until it nearly touched the ceiling. It looked at me with my own face, but the expression was one of cold, calculating hunger. "You're done with this life, Alex," it whispered, the voice vibrating in the marrow of my bones. "You've spent so much time wishing you were someone else. Now, the exchange is complete." There was only one way out. Not the door, but a small rectangular hatch in the wall. The old laundry chute that led to the upper floors. It was rusted and narrow. I dived for the hatch, kicking aside the plastic hampers. I could feel the cold from my reflection closing in on me. It wasn't just a drop in temperature, it was a total loss of memory. I felt the thoughts of my family, my name, my future. They were being vacuumed out of my brain. I shoved my upper body into the chute. It smelled of dust and ancient dust. I clawed at the jagged metal seams, dragging myself upward into the dark pipe. As my legs were about to disappear, I felt a hand wrap around my ankle. The grip was like a vice made of cold stone. "Stay," my reflection whispered with my own voice. "It's so much easier to be the shadow." I kicked back with my free leg, striking something hard and cold. The grip loosened for a fraction of a second, and I scrambled upward, my fingernails tearing as I pulled myself into the vertical shaft. I climbed until my lungs were on fire, moving through the darkness like a panicked animal. When I finally burst out of the third-floor collection bin, I didn't stop. I ran to my room, 304, and locked every bolt. I sat in the middle of my bed, shaking, waiting for the light. But when the sun finally came up, I walked to my closet to get my clean shirt. I looked in the mirror. I wasn't there. The mirror showed my bed. It showed my desk. It showed the dark stain on the floor. But there was no me in the reflection. And then my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Good luck on your exam, Alex. You sounded so happy when we talked this morning." I haven't talked to my mom in 3 days. If you're in a basement tonight and you see a mirror, don't look. Just do your laundry and leave. Because your reflection is tired of being a shadow. It wants to be the one holding the keys. And it's already home.